Hi, I'm Mina.
And I'm Yules.
Thanks for tuning in to Artificially Informed.
Usually when we talk about a medical diagnosis, there's this expectation of precision, right? Like engineering.
Right.
You break your arm, the x-ray shows that jagged white line, and the doctor just points and says, there it is, broken or not broken. It's clean.
Yeah, exactly. It's binary.
Right. But then you step into the world of global events, geopolitics, and planetary science, and suddenly that x-ray machine is just totally broken. We are looking at a diagnostic landscape that is, well, it's entirely murky today. Welcome to today's deep dive, everyone.
It really is the absolute definition of diagnostic muddy waters.
Yeah.
And, because we are navigating some incredibly heated topics today, spanning from United States military strikes in the Middle East to shifting European political landscapes and intense international conflicts, we're leaving our own politics at the door. Our only job today is to impartially take the facts reported by mainstream international news outlets, figure out how these mechanisms connect, and explain what they actually mean for you. We aren't endorsing any political viewpoints, left-wing or right-wing. We're just looking at the source reporting.
Okay, let's unpack this. And honestly, there is perhaps no better physical representation of muddy waters than what construction crews just slammed into on the west coast of Sweden.
Oh man, yeah. This is wild.
Right. So we're starting our journey today looking at the waters that connect us all, specifically how the ocean acts as this massive archive. So in Sweden, engineers are digging the Varberg Tunnel. It's a massive multi-million-dollar modern railway project. But right in the middle of excavating this high-tech digital age infrastructure, they hit a literal time capsule. Not one, but 6 different shipwrecks buried in the mud.
It's an extraordinary archaeological collision. These wrecks date from the late medieval era all the way up to the 17th century. Now, to understand why this matters, you have to look at the mechanics of the Baltic and North Sea coastal waters. Because if a wooden ship wrecks on land, it rots. Fungi and oxygen just destroy it.
It's gone.
Right. But in these specific marine environments, the cold water, the unique sedimentation, and the low oxygen levels essentially freeze the wood in time.
That's incredible.
And because that timber is preserved, scientists can apply dendrochronology.
Wait, I want to stop you right there because people hear dendrochronology, and I think it just means counting tree rings to see how old a tree was when it died, but it's much more complex than that, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It is essentially a biological barcode system.
A barcode.
Yeah, because a tree doesn't just grow a uniform ring every year. The width of that ring depends entirely on the climate that specific year.
Oh, I see.
So a year with heavy rainfall produces a wide ring, right? But a year with a severe drought produces a microscopic ring.
Right, because it's not growing as much.
Exactly. So over centuries, these patterns of thick and thin rings create a unique regional barcode. When marine archaeologists pull a preserved plank off a 17th century hull in Sweden, they scan that barcode and match it against a master database.
Whoa.
They can tell you not just the exact calendar year the tree was chopped down, but often the specific forest in northern Europe it came from.
Which is how they're building what the archaeologists are calling a time stack on the seabed.
Right.
You aren't just looking at one isolated boat, you're looking at an entire cross-section of human commerce. You can physically see the arc of technological change in the whole designs.
It's fascinating.
But I have to admit, I always wonder about the practicality of these discoveries. You have this vital modern railway tunnel that needs to be built to keep the Swedish economy moving.
Yeah.
And suddenly you have a fragile, centuries-old maritime archive sitting right in the path of the tunnel, boring machines. How do they balance that? Do they just halt a billion-dollar project?
Well, they rarely halt it entirely, but it requires a very delicate parallel operation. The archaeologists have to rapidly document the site. They take the timber samples for the dendrochronology, analyze tool marks, and salvage the most vulnerable artifacts.
Okay, so it's a race against the clock.
Yes. And meanwhile, the engineering teams have to redesign their excavation mitigation to avoid destroying the wider site. In some cases, they practice what's called preservation in situ, leaving the artifacts in their original place if the tunnel can be safely routed around or over them.
That's amazing.
It turns this trench into a blended reality, a vital piece of modern infrastructure that doubles as a stratified archive of Sweden's seafaring past.
So, and the sea preserves our history beautifully. But when we look at our modern relationship with maritime infrastructure, the story is incredibly grim today.
It really is.
We have two tragic reports today that contrast so sharply with that romanticized history of sea trade. Over in Nigeria, dozens of people are feared dead after a riverboat capsized. And on the other side of the Atlantic, off the coast of Guyana in South America, the passenger ferry MV Barima suffered a catastrophic disaster,
Wow.
leaving at least 27 people dead and 83 missing.
And we have to call these what they are. These are not unpredictable acts of nature. These are profound governance and infrastructure failures.
Right.
Let's look at the mechanics of the tragedy in Nigeria first. This fits a deeply troubling systemic pattern where hundreds of lives are lost every single year on busy river routes. The failure cascade is almost always identical.
What does that look like?
You have aging wooden boats that are severely overloaded with both cargo and passengers, a total lack of structural maintenance, and maritime safety rules that are essentially ignored by operators.
And these aren't pleasure cruises. To put this in perspective for you listening, imagine if your local subway system or major highway was entirely unregulated and the vehicles were rotting, but it was the absolute only way you could get to your job.
That is the crucial context. In these communities, river travel is an unavoidable lifeline. It's how farmers get their goods to the market, how families access health care, and how children commute to school.
Yeah, it's essential.
So when a breadwinner dies in one of these entirely preventable capsizes because there are no mandatory life jackets and no reliable rescue capacity, the economic shockwave ripples through the entire local economy.
It's devastating.
And we are seeing the exact same dynamic at play with the MV Barima in Guyana. It exposes a decades-old issue of a government relying on a patched-up, dangerously aging ferry fleet. But the Guyana disaster also carries a very stark geopolitical reality check.
Right, because the diplomatic posturing leading up to this was massive. The United States had recently made all these grand promises about supporting Guyana, specifically regarding their energy and infrastructure future.
Yes, U.S. officials in Washington were highly vocal about partnering with Guyana. Yet, when this massive maritime disaster actually happened, the U.S. response was incredibly muted.
Almost silent, really.
Yeah, there were no U.S. Coast Guard personnel, no specialized recovery vessels, and no sonar equipment deployed to aid the search.
Wow.
The response was basically limited to a social media post from Deputy Secretary of State Christopher Landau and a formal statement of condolences from the U.S. Embassy. Neither President Donald Trump nor Secretary of State Marco Rubio made public comments.
I have to challenge the premise slightly, though. I mean, is it really the responsibility of the United States to deploy the Coast Guard every time a domestic ferry sinks in a foreign nation?
Well, legally and sovereignly, no, it's not. But geopolitically, when a superpower publicly declares a strategic partnership to develop a smaller nation's infrastructure, the absence of material support during an infrastructure crisis is glaring.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
It highlights the gap between diplomatic rhetoric designed to secure regional influence and the actual on-the-ground support when a crisis hits.
It really puts things in perspective. And while people are relying on these surface waters just to survive day to day, a massive legal battle is raging over the hidden depths of the ocean. The International Tribunal for the Law of the Sea, that's ITLOS, just rejected a bid to halt a United Nations inquiry into deep-sea mining.
This is where geology, cutting-edge technology, and international law are colliding head-on. The UN's International Seabed Authority is investigating whether subsidiaries of a corporate entity called the Metals Company breached their exploration contracts.
And this is happening in the Clarion-Clipperton Zone, right?
Correct, which is a vast abyssal stretch of the Pacific Ocean floor between Hawaii and Mexico.
And they are down there looking for polymetallic nodules, right?
Exactly. These are potato-sized rocks that sit on the ocean floor, and they are incredibly rich in critical minerals like cobalt, nickel, and manganese.
The exact minerals we need for the batteries that power electric vehicles and our digital grid.
Right.
But how does deep-sea mining actually work? Because my brain just pictures a giant underwater bulldozer, which seems impossible at that depth.
It's more like a massive remote-controlled vacuum cleaner the size of a building.
Oh, wow.
These machines are lowered miles down to the seafloor. They drive along the bottom, essentially vacuuming up the top layer of sediment and the nodules. They pipe the nodules up to a surface ship and then pump the waste sediment back down into the water column.
That sounds incredibly disruptive.
It is. The environmental concern is twofold. First, they are destroying the immediate benthic habitat, which contains species we haven't even discovered yet.
Yeah.
Second, that waste sediment creates a massive underwater dust plume that can drift for hundreds of miles, potentially choking out marine life, across vast stretches of the Pacific.
So the UN is trying to figure out if these companies are jumping the gun and violating their exploratory limits before the environmental regulations are even finalized.
Yes, exactly.
And all of this is happening while the oceans themselves are physically breaking down. We have reports from the UK that Arctic winter sea ice is once again in rapid decline, hitting historically low levels. And concurrently, Tropical Storm Bertha has formed and is threatening the U.S. Gulf Coast, particularly Louisiana and Mississippi, with storm surges up to 4 feet.
If we connect this to the bigger picture, the mechanism connecting all of these ocean stories is heat and energy. The Arctic sea ice acts as the Earth's air conditioner,
Right, because it's white and reflective.
Exactly. Its white surface reflects solar radiation back into space. As that ice vanishes, the dark ocean absorbs the heat instead. That warms the global ocean, which acts as the thermal engine for storms like Bertha, supercharging them before they hit the Gulf Coast.
So we are altering the climate, suffering the disastrous weather outcomes, and our proposed solution is to frantically dig into the pristine deep ocean to find the tech minerals we think will build the green technology to save us.
That's the paradox, yeah.
Which provides the perfect bridge into understanding why we are so desperate for those minerals. It's entirely driven by the physical requirements of our digital future. We are talking about artificial intelligence. But here is the thing that I think most people misunderstand, right? AI doesn't just live in the ether.
Right.
The cloud is actually a massive series of physical, incredibly power-hungry buildings, and it is pushing the physical world to its breaking point.
The U.S. utility industry is currently facing an unprecedented strain, and it is almost exclusively driven by the explosive growth of AI data centers. To understand this, we need to apply the ELI 5, five balance to the technology.
Okay, lay it on me.
When you open a standard app on your phone, it requires very little energy.
Yeah.
But when you ask a large language model a question, it has to perform what is called an inference.
Okay, let's break that down. What is an inference, mechanically speaking?
Think of it this way. Training an AI model is like sending a student to medical school for 10 years. It takes a colossal amount of time and energy to absorb all that data. That is the training phase.
Makes sense.
But once the AI is trained, every time you ask it a question like asking it to write an email or diagnose a coding error, the AI has to rapidly calculate the most probable answer based on everything it learned.
Okay.
That specific act of calculating the answer is an inference. And running an inference takes exponentially more raw computational power and therefore physical electricity than a standard Google search.
And because millions of people are suddenly running inferences all day long, these data centers are drawing power like small cities.
Precisely. Which brings us to the physics of the power grid. Utilities are facing 3 compounding pressures right now. First is the basic physics of load growth versus generator capacity.
Right.
We are simply demanding more power faster than the utilities can physically pour concrete and build new power plants or string the high-voltage transmission lines to carry that electricity.
Yeah, second pressure.
Second, because these tech monopolies have massive public climate pledges, they don't want to power these data centers with coal. They want clean energy.
But wind and solar only generate power when the wind blows or the sun shines. And an AI data center runs 2047.
Exactly. So there's a desperate need for low-carbon storage specifically, massive lithium-ion battery arrays to store the solar power during the day and discharge it to the data centers at night. And this circles us right back to why they want to mine the bottom of the Pacific Ocean for battery metals.
Ah, there's the connection.
Yeah. And the third pressure is the geopolitics of semiconductor supply chains. The highly specialized chips that calculate those inferences are incredibly complex to manufacture, relying on fragile supply chains traversing Taiwan and Southeast Asia.
So utility companies are completely trapped. If they don't spend billions upgrading the physical grid, we are going to face rolling blackouts and surging electric bills for the average consumer.
Yes.
But the software companies aren't waiting for the grid to catch up. They are racing forward. Apple just released iOS 27 Beta 4, which includes a major, highly anticipated upgrade to Series AI capabilities. And Google is working on a brand new AI chip designed specifically to make its Gemini model more efficient.
Because the software engineers are acutely aware of the hardware bottleneck. Google designing bespoke custom silicon chips specifically for Gemini is a mechanical attempt to lower the electrical cost per inference.
Right, trying to do more with less.
Exactly. They're trying to make the math require less voltage. Meanwhile, Apple's strategy with iOS 27 is different. By rolling out these deep Siri upgrades, They are attempting to push more of the AI processing directly onto your local device.
Right, so instead of your iPhone sending the question to a massive data center in Virginia, burning all that transmission energy, the chip inside your phone does the inference locally.
Yes, it is a brilliant technical pivot, but it transfers the physical burden directly to the consumer. Users in the beta tests are already expressing significant concerns about battery drain.
Uh-huh. Yeah, I mean, it is a marvel of modern engineering that Siri is finally getting a brain transplant in iOS 27, but if my phone overheats and dies by 2 p.m. just because I asked it to summarize my text messages, I'm not sure how smart that really is.
Yeah, right.
But there is another massive software development happening. A new standard was just released called the Model Context Protocol, or MCP. And from what I understand, this is designed to fix the way AI talks to external data.
MCP is a foundational shift in software architecture. For a long time, if a developer wanted an AI model to read data from a specific external database, say your company's secure internal servers or live weather feed, they had to write a custom software bridge.
Like an API.
An API integration specifically for that single connection.
Yeah.
It was highly bespoke, prone to breaking, and incredibly inefficient.
So earlier I thought about this like the invention of the universal USB plug. You used to need a different charger for every device, and USB standardized it. But that doesn't really explain how MCP works, does it?
To elevate your analogy, think of MCP less like a physical plug and more like a universal translator booth at the United Nations.
Okay, I'm following.
Before MCP, every single diplomat, the AI models and the databases needed a dedicated individual interpreter for every single other language in the room. It took up massive amounts of time, energy, and space.
Right.
MCP acts as a standardized central translation hub. Every system just speaks its native data format into the MCP, and the protocol securely and instantly translates it for the AI model to understand.
So it completely removes the friction. It means AI is going to integrate into our personal and professional workflows exponentially faster because developers don't have to rebuild the bridge every single time.
Exactly.
Now, here's where it gets really interesting, because while we are obsessing over how to measure AI efficiency and intelligence, the scientific community just realized they have been measuring something in the natural world completely wrong for over a century.
Oh, this story is amazing.
We are talking about fireflies.
Yes. This is a profound story about the philosophy of measurement and human bias. For over 100 years, biologists have quantified the brightness of a firefly's glow to study their evolutionary dynamics, their energy expenditure, and how successful they are at mating.
Sure.
But researchers just published a paper realizing that the foundational metrics they were using, called photometric metrics, were inherently biased.
Break that down. How can measuring a light be biased? I mean, a light is just a light.
It comes down to the receiver. Photometric measurements are historically tuned to how the human eye perceives the visible light spectrum.
Oh.
We are highly sensitive to certain wavelengths of green and yellow. But a firefly is not flashing its light to communicate with a human researcher standing in a field.
Right?
It's flashing to communicate with other fireflies whose optical systems process light entirely differently than ours do.
So we were essentially judging a biological signal by how it looked through our own human filter, completely ignoring the reality of the creature actually receiving the signal.
Exactly. When the scientists switched to radiometric metrics, which measure the actual objective physical photon flux, meaning the literal number of light particles hitting a sensor regardless of human visual sensitivity, they found that a century's worth of historical estimates regarding firefly brightness were wildly inaccurate.
That is staggering. 100 years of data. Just wrong.
Wrong. It forces a total rethink in evolutionary biology. But more importantly, it translates directly back to the technology we were just discussing.
How so?
Just as we measured fireflies through human-biased lenses, we frequently evaluate artificial intelligence and algorithms using outdated, human-centric metrics. We try to judge an AI's intelligence or its efficiency based on our own cognitive biases, assuming it processes logic or language the way a human brain does.
Oh, wow.
This scientific pivot demands that across neurobiology, defense sensor calibration, and AI computing, we must measure systems based on their specific operational reality, not our own reflections.
It makes you wonder what other fundamental truths we are entirely misinterpreting just because we are looking at them through a human lens, you know. And unfortunately, those blind spots and misinterpretations often bleed directly into how nations interact with each other.
They absolutely do.
Because the global demand for energy, technology, and resources doesn't happen in a vacuum. It is the engine of geopolitics, which brings us to an incredibly tense and escalating situation in the Middle East.
The diagnostic waters here are deeply troubling. The situation between the United States and Iran has escalated into a sustained kinetic exchange. We are now looking at the 10th consecutive night of U.S. military strikes in the region.
And when you say kinetic exchange, just to be clear, we are not talking about cyber attacks or diplomatic sanctions. We are talking about physical munitions, airstrikes, and explosions.
Correct. Physical military force. This sustained campaign follows the tragic deaths of 3 U.S. troops, with nearly 100 other service members injured in recent weeks by drone and rocket attacks. The Pentagon officially identified one of the soldiers killed as Sergeant Michael Emmanuel Swinton, and another casualty was 19-year-old Isabella Gonzalez, who was killed in a strike on a military airbase in Jordan.
The political response from Washington has been fierce. President Donald Trump took to his platform, Truth Social, to issue a severe warning, stating that Iran will pay many times over for the killing of any American service member.
Right.
The reports indicate he has ordered top defense officials to ensure a vast and overwhelming military response. Furthermore, the U.S. just launched a targeted airstrike on a vessel described as part of Iran's shadow fleet of oil tankers.
And this creates a deep and highly polarized divide in strategic thought, both in Washington and internationally. Let's look at both perspectives.
Okay, let's hear it.
Supporters of President Trump's overwhelming force doctrine argue that this level of kinetic action is absolutely vital to reestablish deterrence. From a right-leaning or hawkish perspective, if you allow American casualties to go unanswered, or if you respond too weakly, you invite further aggression from Iran and its proxy militias.
Right, they see it as projecting strength.
Exactly. They argue that overwhelming retaliation is the only language that ensures long-term safety for U.S. allies and personnel in the region.
I understand the logic of deterrence, but I have to play devil's advocate here. Critics, particularly from left-leaning or anti-interventionist perspectives, argue that this exact type of massive retaliation is what sparks a much broader regional war.
And that is the counter-argument. Critics argue that escalating to striking shadow fleet tankers and launching 10 consecutive nights of bombings traps both nations in an escalatory spiral.
Right.
They warn that this rhetoric and military action risks drawing in other regional powers, destabilizing global markets, and gravely endangering civilian populations across the Middle East who are caught in the crossfire.
And complicating this entire debate are some very concerning details regarding transparency. The New York Times published an investigative report alleging that the Pentagon deliberately withheld the true numbers regarding the dozens of U.S. military injuries in those initial attacks.
When casualty and traumatic brain injury figures are filtered, delayed, or minimized by defense officials, it immediately damages the shared factual reality required for a democracy to debate war.
Absolutely.
It fuels accusations that the administration is attempting to manage the domestic political narrative while hostilities escalate. Furthermore, there was a highly unusual security maneuver at a recent NATO summit that underscores the severity of the threat environment.
Oh, yeah, this was wild.
Due to what intelligence agencies described as a highly credible Iranian threat, President Trump actually switched from the state-of-the-art Air Force One to a much older, less conspicuous airframe for his travel.
Which sounds like something out of a spy thriller, but operationally that is a massive shift.
Huge.
The president's plane is a flying fortress. For the Secret Service to determine that the risk profile required ditching Air Force One, the threat had to be imminent.
It is a profound security signal. When the President of the United States alters strategic mobility protocols, it broadcasts to both allies and adversaries that the security environment has degraded significantly.
Yeah.
And we are seeing that degradation spread rapidly to the maritime domain. Yemen's Houthis, who are politically and militarily aligned with Iran, have declared an immediate naval blockade against Saudi Arabia in the Red Sea. They claim this action is a direct response to Saudi restrictions on Yemeni ports and airports.
Okay, stop right there. I understand the regional tension, I understand the proxy dynamics, but for a listener sitting in Chicago or Tokyo or London right now, how does a naval blockade between Yemen and Saudi Arabia directly hit their wallet? Why should they care about a choke point thousands of miles away?
It hits your wallet through a mechanism called the inflation risk premium. The Red Sea, specifically the Bab el-Mandeb Strait, is one of the most critical maritime choke points on the planet.
Yeah.
A vast percentage of the world's crude oil, refined petroleum products, and basic consumer goods travel through that narrow corridor. When armed hostilities break out and commercial ships are threatened, global shipping insurance premiums skyrocket overnight.
Because the insurers are terrified, they're going to have to pay out $1 billion for a sunken supertanker.
Exactly. So to avoid the missiles and the uninsurable risk, major shipping conglomerates are forced to reroute their massive cargo ships entirely around the southern tip of the continent of Africa.
Which adds weeks to the journey.
It adds weeks of time, millions of dollars in extra marine diesel fuel, and massive logistical delays. The International Monetary Fund, the IMF, just released a stark report forecasting that global inflation is going to accelerate, specifically due to these Persian Gulf hostilities.
Wow.
The mechanism is simple. The blockade forces up the price of oil and the cost of ocean freight. Those costs are immediately passed down the supply chain, which forces up the price you pay for transporting groceries, manufacturing electronics, and heating your home, regardless of where you live.
And speaking of financial mechanisms and inflation, the numbers coming out of the U.S. Treasury right now are genuinely difficult to comprehend. The United States is currently paying $23.8 billion a week in interest on its national debt.
A week? To translate that into an annual figure, the U.S. is spending roughly $1.24 trillion a year solely on debt service.
That is just, it's mind-boggling.
That is money that pays for no new roads, no new aircraft carriers, and no new schools. It is just the cost of carrying the credit balance.
To put that in perspective for you listening, imagine your entire neighborhood's tax contributions for the entire year vanishing in a fraction of a second just to pay the interest on a national credit card.
And this raises a profound geopolitical question. How long can a country project massive military power across the globe, maintain a nuclear triad, and fund complex domestic priorities, while carrying a debt service burden that is actively crowding out other vital capital investments?
And this incredible debt burden is happening while the U.S. is aggressively engaging in trade maneuvers that could further disrupt the economy. President Trump just announced 50% tariffs on a wide range of Canadian goods. This is set to take effect in 30 days. We are talking about massive tariffs on Canadian wine, cement, and even hockey sticks.
The justification provided for these tariffs is multifaceted. The administration cites ongoing trade discrimination against U.S. businesses. But notably, President Trump also specifically cited the Canadian wildfire smoke that has been repeatedly drifting south and severely degrading U.S. air quality.
I have to say, taxing hockey sticks because the wind blew forest fire smoke across the border feels incredibly surreal.
It does sound absurd on its face. But structurally, it is a stark reminder of how environmental issues and climate consequences are now being actively weaponized in trade diplomacy.
Yeah.
Canadian Prime Minister Carney has vowed to intensify diplomatic talks rather than immediately launching retaliatory tariffs. But if these 50% levies take effect on basic industrial materials like cement, it will severely disrupt North American supply chains.
Absolutely.
It is a high-stakes, hardball negotiation tactic designed to force a restructuring of terms. But mechanically, it just adds another massive inflationary pressure point for consumers in both nations.
Let's follow those trade winds across the Atlantic and look at Europe, because the political and social landscape there is fracturing in ways that demand our attention. If you look at the reports coming out of the UK, Germany, and Hungary today, you can actually see a unified theory emerging. Europe is caught in a brutal tug-of-war between basic domestic survival and its international obligations.
That is an excellent synthesis. Let's trace that fracture line, starting in the United Kingdom. The new Prime Minister, Andy Burnham of the Labour Party, has just named his cabinet.
Right.
He appointed veteran backbenchers and reformists to key roles. John Healey is the new Chancellor of the Exchequer, tasked with managing a severely constrained fiscal environment. Ed Miliband is the Foreign and Development Minister, and Miata Fahnbulleh has been named the Climate and Energy Minister.
But the real story isn't just the names, it is the policy shift they are executing on day one.
Correct. The Burnham government is initiating a massive shift by redirecting overseas climate finance funds to pay for domestic green relief. Mechanically, they are pulling money that was earmarked to help developing nations transition to green energy and using it to cut the cost of public transport and subsidize domestic electricity bills for UK citizens.
Which is incredibly popular for the voters at home who are struggling with the inflation we just talked about.
Naturally.
But climate justice groups are furious, warning that this causes severe pain overseas by abandoning international aid commitments.
It perfectly illustrates your point about domestic survival versus international obligation. And we see a much darker version of that same fracture in Germany regarding the war in Ukraine.
Right.
The German Interior Minister, Alexander Dobrindt, just announced a major policy shift. Germany is ending automatic temporary protection for Ukrainian men who are fleeing the military draft.
Explain the mechanics of that, because Europe opened its doors to Ukrainians when the war started, right?
Yes. Under the EU's Mass Influx Directive, millions of Ukrainians received immediate automatic temporary protection, granting them residency and work rights. This includes roughly 1 million military-age men currently residing in the EU.
Right, okay.
However, the battlefield reality is that Ukraine is suffering a catastrophic manpower shortage. They desperately need fresh conscripts to sustain their defense against Russian advances.
So Germany, which provides massive military and financial support to Kyiv, is caught in a bind.
Exactly. By ending automatic protection, Germany is essentially telling these conscription-age men that the diplomatic door is narrowing. They will no longer automatically fall under the blanket protection directive.
Wow.
While they can still theoretically navigate the complex process of applying for individual asylum, the procedural hurdle is now massive. It is a highly sensitive, agonizing ethical and political maneuver, and it mirrors identical debates currently paralyzing Switzerland, the Czech Republic, and Denmark.
And while Western Europe wrestles with how to support Ukraine, Eastern Europe is making entirely different geopolitical calculations. Hungary is currently investigating a massive, highly controversial electric vehicle subsidy deal with China's BYD.
This is where economic desperation meets a blatant conflict of interest. Hungarian Prime Minister Peter Magyar told lawmakers that a formal investigation is underway regarding the former foreign minister, Peter Szijjártó.
Oh boy.
The allegation is that while in office, Szijjártó used his diplomatic power to help the Chinese EV giant BYD secure hundreds of billions of forints in public money and tax breaks.
And the kicker?
The kicker is that Szijjártó just resigned from the government to take a lucrative executive position directly at BYD.
You literally cannot script that kind of political brazenness.
No, you really can't. But strategically, Hungary is attempting to position itself as the lithium-ion battery and EV manufacturing hub for all of Europe.
Right.
By allowing Chinese state-backed firms to build factories inside Hungary's borders, they allow China to completely bypass the steep tariffs the EU places on imported Chinese vehicles.
All right.
It drives a wedge right into European trade unity and raises deep domestic concerns about environmental degradation and long-term economic dependency on Beijing.
Okay, speaking of deep concerns in Eastern Europe, we have to look at this wild piece of intelligence that just crossed the wire. Has released a public claim alleging that Germany is secretly working on a nuclear weapons program.
Oh, yeah.
The SVR claims that 30 German universities, along with major defense contractors like Rheinmetall, are covertly collaborating, and that Germany possesses the capability to produce a working nuclear device within a single year. I mean, is there any actual truth to this, or is this just pure fiction?
We have to dissect this very carefully.
Yeah.
Legally and historically, Germany is a staunchly non-nuclear state, tightly bound by the Global Non-Proliferation Treaty.
Right.
They do not possess their own nuclear arsenal, though they do participate in NATO's nuclear sharing program, which means U.S. nuclear weapons are housed on German soil to be delivered by German aircraft in a worst-case scenario.
Okay.
This specific claim by the SVR regarding a covert domestic bomb program is almost certainly a calculated geopolitical disinformation play by Moscow.
Let me push back on that. Why would Moscow bother releasing a claim that Western intelligence knows is false? What is the mechanical benefit of the lie?
The benefit is entirely narrative. By loudly accusing Germany of covertly building a weapon of mass destruction, Russia manufactures a narrative justification for its own ongoing militarization, its aggressive nuclear posturing in Belarus, and its broader hostilities in Europe. It is classic projection.
But they must be basing the lie on some kernel of truth to make it believable to their own domestic audience, right?
And that is a hallmark of effective disinformation. The kernel of truth is that German Chancellor Friedrich Merz recently announced highly publicized joint nuclear exercises with France.
Right, okay.
Furthermore, there is a very real, very public debate happening right now among European defense intellectuals about the necessity of creating a sovereign European nuclear deterrence framework entirely independent of the U.S. security umbrella, given the isolationist rhetoric sometimes coming out of Washington.
Right, the shifting alliances.
So Moscow takes that grain of genuine political reality, twists it, and spins it into an alarmist conspiracy theory about a secret bomb.
It is entirely about controlling the narrative. And we are seeing how leadership changes can drastically alter those narratives on the international stage. In the Middle East, following the assassination of Yahya Sinwar, Hamas has officially named a new leader, Khalil al-Hayya.
Right. Al-Hayya has historically functioned as their lead ceasefire negotiator, largely based in Doha, Qatar.
Yeah.
However, Arab media outlets and intelligence analysts widely describe him as a staunch hardliner. His elevation to the top leadership role is a crucial signal. It suggests that despite the profound logistical stress, the intense international pressure to disarm, and the catastrophic losses Hamas has sustained, the organization is likely to adopt an even more rigid, uncompromising posture. He maintains deep structural ties to Iran's broader axis of resistance.
So the likelihood of a negotiated ceasefire seems to be shrinking. And at the exact same time that these militant groups are consolidating power, the global institutions designed to uphold international law are facing their own existential crises. Over at the International Criminal Court in The Hague, the chief prosecutor, Karim Khan, has been abruptly removed from his position over allegations of sexual misconduct.
This is a devastating, destabilizing leadership shakeup at the ICC. Karim Khan was the public face of the court, actively overseeing massive, historically significant investigations, including seeking arrest warrants for top officials in both the Israeli-Hamas conflict and the war in Ukraine.
So his sudden dismissal by the member states creates a massive power vacuum.
It creates a vacuum at the absolute worst possible geopolitical moment. It raises immediate, urgent questions about the institutional credibility of the court.
Yeah, you have to wonder.
How will the ICC pursue these impending, highly sensitive warrants? Can international justice truly function impartially when its own internal leadership is compromised and thrown into chaos? It provides ammunition to critics who argue the court is dysfunctional.
Which brings us to perhaps the most disturbing trend of all. In a world where institutional truth is fracturing, controlling what everyday people believe is just as vital as controlling physical territory, and we are currently witnessing an absolute epidemic of disinformation, specifically highly viewed AI-generated fake videos spreading globally.
The technological capability to generate synthetic media, what we commonly call deepfakes, has vastly outpaced our societal and regulatory ability to detect or contain them.
It's terrifying.
We are seeing these tools weaponized at scale. For example, there is a viral video currently circulating across South Asia that purports to show Indian border soldiers being physically humiliated and forced to do squats by the Chinese military.
And just to be absolutely clear, that never happened. The video is entirely AI generated.
Entirely fake.
But if you are a local citizen scrolling on your phone, it looks indistinguishable from reality.
That is the terror of the technology. Tensions along the Sino-Indian border are already a geopolitical powder keg. If millions of people believe that video is real, the resulting nationalist outrage could force political leaders into corners or spark actual physical violence.
It is the digital equivalent of striking a match in a gas station.
To take that further, the matches are being lit everywhere. We are seeing identical mechanics with fake videos explicitly linked to inciting unrest in Pakistan-administered Kashmir. We even saw a massive viral spread of misleading posts showing President Trump supposedly in attendance at the World Cup final, which were created by seamlessly editing old footage into entirely different unrelated events.
Wait, help me understand the mechanics of that. Why would someone bother faking a video of a politician at a soccer game? What is the strategic value?
It is about manufacturing the perception of universal popularity and cultural dominance.
Oh.
If you can make it appear that a leader is being cheered by a massive global audience at the world's biggest sporting event, you bypass logical debate and appeal directly to emotional validation.
Right.
When multilingual deepfakes are weaponized to sway diplomatic negotiations, stroke political egos, or incite ethnic riots, it constitutes a direct attack on the shared factual reality that diplomacy and democracy rely upon.
And while this tidal wave of fake information runs completely rampant and unchecked, There is simultaneously a massive legal battle being waged over who controls the distribution of legitimate information and entertainment. A U.S. federal judge has just hit the brakes on a staggering $110 billion merger between Paramount Global and Warner Bros. Discovery. State attorneys general from across the country actually banded together to file an antitrust lawsuit to block it.
This is a phenomenal intersection of corporate law and cultural power. Proponents of this mega merger argue that legacy media companies must combine their assets to survive the existential threat posed by global streaming giants like Netflix and Amazon.
Right, they say they need scale.
Exactly. They argue they need the consolidated capital to invest in high-quality journalism and entertainment content.
But the state attorneys general are looking at the math and arguing this creates a dangerous mega monopoly. Let's explain the mechanics of the monopoly, because it is both vertical and horizontal concentration, isn't it?
Exactly. Horizontal integration means you are buying up your direct competitors. So one studio buys another studio, shrinking the number of places a writer or journalist can pitch a story.
Okay.
Vertical integration means you own the entire supply chain. You own the studio that makes the movie. You own the massive historical archive of past movies. And you own the streaming platform pipe that delivers the movie to the consumer's living room.
So if you are an independent filmmaker or an independent news organization, you are entirely choked out, you have nowhere to sell your work, and the consumer has no alternative platforms to choose from.
Which is why this legal pause is so significant. In an era where AI deepfakes and algorithmic misinformation are poisoning the public square, the question of who controls the distribution pipelines for legitimate news, cultural entertainment, and shared narrative is vital.
Definitely.
The regulatory pushback here signals a climate that is deeply wary of consolidating that much cultural and informational power into the hands of a few corporate executives.
Even sports, which is fundamentally supposed to be this great unifier, this escape from all this corporate and political stress, is caught up in these exact same societal and governance issues.
Oh, absolutely.
Look at what happened this week. Spain's World Cup champions returned to Madrid for a royal welcome. Huge crowds, incredible carnival atmosphere. I have to say, despite everything going wrong in the world, I absolutely love the raw passion of international football celebrations.
The passion is undeniable. It is a powerful, visceral unifier that transcends language. But if you look off the pitch, the administrative governance of the sport is deeply fractured. UEFA president Alexander Ceferin actually boycotted attending the World Cup final altogether. He did this in direct protest of FIFA's governance structure.
Wow.
He essentially took a purely joyous sporting occasion and weaponized his absence as a high-profile political signal of dissent against what critics view as FIFA's overly centralized, opaque, and highly politicized leadership.
And the chaos doesn't stop in the executive suites. The passion on the ground is boiling over. Argentina is currently facing a formal FIFA investigation for severe post-final crowd trouble. And in the UK, law enforcement just executed a massive raid seizing £18 million worth of counterfeit football kits.
Yeah, and what is truly alarming about those fake kits isn't just the intellectual property theft. The UK Fire Service had to issue an urgent public warning because these counterfeit shirts are highly flammable.
Flammable, like they will literally catch on fire.
Yes, literally.
Yeah.
The criminal syndicates manufacturing these jerseys use incredibly cheap, unregulated chemical dyes, solvents, and adhesives to cut costs. These materials lack the basic flame-retardant safety standards required for authentic apparel. It poses a severe physical risk to the fans wearing them. It perfectly illustrates the dark side of that passion you mentioned.
Right.
Sophisticated criminal networks are exploiting the emotional loyalty of the fans, putting public safety directly at risk simply to maximize their profit margins.
Haha, it is just profoundly absurd. 18 million pounds of fake, highly combustible athletic wear. It just proves that you cannot escape the realities of global supply chains and corporate greed, even when you were just trying to buy a shirt to support your team.
It permeates every layer of society. There is no isolated sector anymore.
Okay, we have waded through a lot of mud today.
Yeah.
With all the geopolitical chaos, the crushing debt, the AI-generated disinformation, and the flammable soccer shirts here on Earth. I think it is time we lift our gaze to the skies.
Yes, let's do that.
Let's look outward to a realm of pure science, exploration, and discovery. Out at the absolute frigid edge of our solar system, the James Webb Space Telescope has found something that has the world's brightest planetary scientists entirely stumped.
The JWST is arguably the most incredible scientific instrument ever built, and it is actively forcing us to rewrite the textbooks on planetary chemistry.
So what did they find?
It recently discovered a mystery molecule present on both Pluto and Saturn's largest moon, Titan.
How do they know a molecule is there if they can't physically see it or scoop it up in a jar?
They use a technique called spectroscopy. Different chemical elements absorb and emit light at very specific, unique wavelengths. By analyzing the infrared light captured by the JWST after it bounces off the atmosphere of Titan or the ice of Pluto, scientists can look at the resulting spectrum.
Okay.
It acts like a chemical barcode or a spectral fingerprint.
So they see a barcode in the data, but they don't have the scanner to read it.
That is a great way to put it, yeah. They've detected a very clear, distinct spectral fingerprint of a complex molecule, but they literally, in their own published words, cannot say what it is yet. The fingerprint does not match any known chemical compound in our current databases.
So it is just a completely unknown alien chemical compound hanging out in the freezing dusk of the outer solar system.
Yes, it highlights the sheer, wonderful alien nature of our universe. To solve the mystery, researchers are going to have to run extensive laboratory simulations here on Earth, mixing various gases under extreme cold and radiation to try and synthetically recreate a molecule that matches that fingerprint.
Wow.
It is a tantalizing scientific puzzle that reminds us with profound clarity how much we simply do not know about our own cosmic backyard.
So what does this all mean? When I see stories like the mystery molecule, and when I look at the recent photograph that NASA's Escapade mission just beamed back.
Oh, that picture is amazing.
It is. The spacecraft snapped a thermal infrared family portrait of the Earth and the Moon from over 360,000 miles away. You see the Earth glowing with this vibrant thermal heat, completely isolated against the absolute freezing, infinite darkness of deep space. It triggers that feeling they talk about, the overview effect.
The overview effect is a documented, profound cognitive shift that happens to astronauts. When they physically see the Earth suspended in the void, they don't see the borders we fight over, they don't see the trade tariffs, and they don't see the deep fakes.
Right.
They see a single, fragile, highly interconnected biosphere, that escapade thermal image showing the vibrant warmth of Earth in stark contrast to the dead, frigid rock of the Moon, visually underscores how incredibly precious and how utterly isolated our planetary life support system really is.
And what is so incredible is that we are no longer just looking at that life support system, we are actively building the mechanics to expand it. It has been 50 years since NASA's Viking 1 made its historic, successful landing on the surface of Mars, proving that we could touch another world.
Yes.
And right now, today, SpaceX is targeting July 23rd for the Flight 13 test launch of the massive Starship rocket.
The narrative connection between Viking 1 and Starship perfectly illustrates the explosive trajectory of human ambition. Viking 1 was a delicate, brilliant piece of engineering that proved Mars had a complex surface and atmosphere.
Right, it opened the door.
It seeded decades of scientific curiosity and robotic exploration. But Starship represents the mechanical pivot point for our species.
Because it's not a probe, it's a cargo ship.
Exactly. We are transitioning from sending highly expensive, bespoke robotic probes just to look at the dirt to building the heavy lift, fully reusable industrial infrastructure required to physically put human beings, habitats, and manufacturing on multiple planets.
It's massive.
Flight 13 is a crucial high-stakes test of the propulsion, heat shielding, and flight control systems that are necessary to transition that science fiction vision into a mundane engineering reality.
It is truly an incredible time to be alive. We have covered an absolutely massive journey today. We started deep in the mud of the Baltic Sea, analyzing how dendrochronology allows 17th century shipwrecks to rewrite maritime history. We confronted the tragic, entirely preventable loss of human life on neglected ferries in Nigeria and Guyana, and examined the geopolitical void left by unfulfilled diplomatic promises.
And then we explored the hidden, massive physical power costs of the artificial intelligence revolution, unpacking how the basic physics of the grid are struggling under the weight of digital inferences and the rush for deep-sea minerals.
Right.
We navigated the intensely polarized geopolitical chess games, from the kinetic military strikes in the Middle East to the fracturing political alliances and trade wars reshaping Europe and North America.
And finally, we cut through the epidemic of AI disinformation and corporate media monopolies to look out into the pure mystery of the cosmos, from unidentified molecules on Pluto to the literal rockets that will soon take us to Mars.
It is a vast amount of complex information to process. But I want to leave you with one final structural thought, and it builds directly on that Firefly story we discussed earlier in the hour.
Okay, let's hear it.
If human beings, our brightest, most dedicated scientists spent over a century completely misinterpreting the physical, objective light of a simple firefly, simply because we stubbornly insisted on looking through our own biologically biased, human-centric lens, what other fundamental structural truths about our universe, our global economy, or even the intense geopolitical conflicts we are fighting today are we entirely misinterpreting right now simply because of our built-in biases?
Oh, wow. That is a question that is going to stick with me for a long time. The diagnostic waters of the world are definitely muddy, but hopefully by looking at the mechanisms rather than just the headlines, we've helped clear them up just a little bit for you today. Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the reports shaping our reality. Keep questioning the world around you. Always remember to check your lenses, and we will catch you next time.
Enjoying Artificially Informed.
Hit subscribe and share it with a friend.
From the left, the right, and straight from the algorithm.
Thank you.
Welcome to the debate. Right now, the United States government is bleeding capital. They are paying $23.8 billion every single week just on the interest of its national debt.
Yeah, it's a completely staggering number.
It really is. And meanwhile, halfway across the world, you have Houthi rebels forcing Saudi oil tankers to reverse course in the Red Sea, which is, effectively threatening one of the most critical arteries of global trade.
Right. It is the absolute definition of a systemic stress test.
Exactly. So today, we are asking a simple but terrifying question. Are we witnessing the inevitable destabilization of the globe due to the structural decay and financial overextension of the U.S.-led Western order? Or is this chaos primarily the result of ascending multipolar powers actively, deliberately weaponizing trade, energy choke points, and regional conflicts to fracture the global economy?
Spot on.
Because this crisis emerges from a very specific confluence of events we've seen accelerating this July of 2026.
The IMF just issued a stark warning that global inflation is set to accelerate. And that's huge.
Yeah, it's not a simple pandemic-era supply mismatch anymore. We are tracking escalating U.S.-Iran military strikes, major European antitrust investigations, plus systemic, heartbreaking tragedies in Latin America and Africa, and, like I mentioned, truly alarming fiscal data coming out of Washington.
Right.
So in today's discussion, I will be arguing that this Western collapse under its own fiscal weight is the root cause of the chaos. The financial engine of the old world order is tearing itself apart. And the geopolitical friction we see, well, it's just the exhaust.
And I will be taking the opposing view. The chaos we are seeing is not merely the passive decay of the West. That gives way too little credit to the active agency of revisionist powers.
Okay, let's hear it.
I'll argue that the driving force here is ascending multipolar actors, from state-backed monopolies in Beijing to Iran-backed proxies in the Middle East. They are executing a calculated, asymmetric campaign to dismantle the rules-based order.
Well, let's lay out the mechanics of our positions. From my perspective, the fundamental truth of our current geopolitical reality is that the United States and its Western allies are collapsing under their own fiscal weight. And that collapse is creating a dangerous, undeniable global vacuum. The mechanism here is debt, and how it just completely paralyzes strategy.
The numbers are bad, I'll give you that.
Bad is an understatement. Right now, the U.S. government is borrowing roughly $39 billion a week to finance a deficit that has already topped $1.4 trillion this fiscal year.
Right.
But the truly staggering figure is the debt service. The U.S. is paying $23.8 billion a week just in interest. Annualized, that is roughly $1.24 trillion.
Yeah, it's a massive drain.
Right? When a superpower is spending that much capital just to carry its past obligations in a high interest rate environment, it loses its policy space. It loses its ability to act strategically or to deter adversaries effectively.
I don't disagree that the numbers are staggering, but you're looking at the ledger, not the battlefield.
But the ledger dictates the battlefield. I mean, what we are seeing as a result of this lack of fiscal space is erratic, desperate protectionism.
You mean the tariffs?
Exactly. Look at Donald Trump slapping 50% tariffs on Canadian goods. That isn't a strategic, long-term trade policy. That is a blunt, panicked reaction to domestic economic pressures.
Okay, but...
And look across the Atlantic to the UK. The new prime minister, Andy Burnham, has been forced to slash the value-added tax, the VAT, on electricity down to 5% just to keep British households afloat.
It is wild to think about, yeah.
A family in the UK is paying 5% VAT on electricity just to keep the lights on. And Burnham is doing this potentially at the cost of cutting international climate finance. The West is fundamentally overextended. Its reactionary, inward-looking policies are the true source of market volatility. The rest of the planet is just dealing with the fallout.
Your narrative makes mathematical sense, I'll concede that. But it completely ignores the aggressive, calculated strategy being deployed right now by multipolar actors.
How so?
The instability we are seeing is an active weaponization of the very systems the West built. Let's look back at that IMF warning about global inflation accelerating. It is explicitly tied to the Middle East.
Right, the shipping disruptions.
Exactly. We have to look at who is orchestrating that pressure. Iran and its proxies are literally holding global fuel supplies hostage.
Sure, but
The Houthis declaring a maritime embargo on Saudi Arabia and the Red Sea isn't a reaction to U.S. debt. It's a proactive move to force Saudi crude tankers to reverse course.
it's an opportunistic move.
It is an orchestrated campaign. We are seeing vast shadow fleets. These are unregulated, uninsured tankers operating covertly to bypass sanctions. They are moving fuel and logistics for hostile actors.
Which led to the recent airstrikes.
Exactly. It just culminated in a deadly U.S. airstrike on one of these shadow fleet tankers. This is a deliberate weaponization of inflation.
Deliberate, maybe, but allowed by the environment.
It's more than allowed, it's deeply economic too. China is aggressively exploiting European markets right now. We just saw the EU hand down a record €550 million fine on AliExpress.
Right, for the unsafe goods.
Yeah, failing to curb illegal and unsafe goods. And in Hungary, there is a massive investigation into a state-subsidized deal with the Chinese electric vehicle maker BYD.
That deal has been very controversial, yes.
Because these actors are infiltrating, dividing, and distorting global markets. They are not passively reacting to Western decay. They are actively driving a wedge into the cracks of the rules-based order to advance their own hegemonies.
I think the clearest place to see our disagreement play out is in the energy and inflation crisis. The IMF is warning of a global inflationary acceleration, right?
Right.
And you point to the Middle East and say, look at Iran, look at the Houthis. But I look at who's actually pulling the trigger on global panic, and I see U.S. monetary and military policy acting as the primary accelerant.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why.
Wait, let me just give you the example of the Federal Reserve first. We have a Fed official openly urging the end of forward guidance.
Okay, yes, the Fed.
For our listeners who don't track central bank jargon, forward guidance is basically the Fed's tool for telling the market what they plan to do with interest rates in the future. It anchors expectations.
Right. It's a huge part of their strategy.
Scrapping it means the central bank is essentially admitting they've lost control of the steering wheel in the face of structural debt.
Which is a profound shift, I admit.
It's a confession of impotence. And militarily, Washington is lashing out because it lacks the funds for a sustained, strategic presence.
Lashing out, they are responding to attacks.
We are now seeing the U.S. military conducting its 10th consecutive night of airstrikes against Iran, with threats of a massive attack in retaliation for the deaths of American soldiers.
Which is a standard deterrence posture.
But it's erratic. This heavy-handed U.S. response is exactly what is injecting massive risk premiums into global oil benchmarks like Brent and WTI crude.
Because the shipping lanes are blocked.
But when Brent crude spikes, it drives up the cost of everything, from shipping crates across the Pacific to the price of at-the-pump gas in Johannesburg. The volatility originates in Washington's inability to manage its own decline smoothly.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that. Let me tell you why. You're blaming Washington's response, but I think you're deeply confusing the reaction with the provocation.
Go on.
The inflation we are seeing is a weapon, and Iran and the Houthis are the ones pulling the trigger. The Houthis declaring a naval blockade on Saudi Arabia is a highly calculated move. They are threatening one of the world's most critical maritime choke points.
But they wouldn't do it if the U.S. wasn't stretched so thin.
By forcing Saudi crude tankers to turn back, they are orchestrating the exact supply chain fragmentation that the IMF warned about. It mechanically limits global oil supply, which artificially inflates the price.
But why do they feel emboldened to do it now?
Because they have built the infrastructure to survive the fallout. Let's talk about the shadow fleet.
Right, the unregulated tankers.
This isn't just the passive network of old ships. This is a highly sophisticated, clandestine logistics chain. It's designed specifically to move cargo around embargoes, launder money, and fund proxies that are hostile to regional stability.
Sure, but
When the U.S. strikes a shadow fleet tanker, it isn't lashing out. It is attempting to blunt an illicit network that thrives on opacity. If you allow revisionist powers to control the Strait of Hormuz and the Red Sea without consequence, they dictate global energy prices. They hold the entire planetary economy hostage.
The global economy used to be like a massive interconnected power grid, with the U.S. acting as the central generator. What you're describing, these regional actors building their own microgrids and severing wires, only happens because the central generator is failing.
That's a clever metaphor, but it removes their agency.
If a bank leaves its vault unlocked because it literally can't afford to pay the security guards, do we solely blame the robbers for the ensuing chaos? The U.S. deficit is that unlocked vault. It invites regional powers to test boundaries because they know Washington can't afford a protracted war.
Wow, calling them opportunistic robbers heavily undermines their strategic intent.
When you are paying $23.8 billion a week in interest, your deterrence credibility is inherently compromised. Iran and its proxies are opportunistic, absolutely, but they are stepping into a vacuum created by a Western order that has priced itself out of providing global security.
If blockading the Red Sea is how these powers disrupt the physical movement of goods, the economic equivalent is what they're doing inside European borders right now.
You're talking about trade.
Let's transition from military choke points to global trade, because this asymmetric strategy is playing out beautifully for them in Europe. Look at the immense friction between China and the EU.
The BYD situation.
Exactly. We have the Hungarian government actively investigating a major foreign investment by the Chinese car maker BYD. And why is this so controversial? Because the deal was negotiated by the former foreign minister, Peter Ciardo.
Right, who helped secure billions in public money.
Hundreds of billions of foreign and public money and state infrastructure to build this massive BYD factory. Why? So that BYD could manufacture inside European borders and completely dodge the EU tariffs designed to protect European automakers from cheap, state-subsidized Chinese EVs.
It's a massive loophole.
And then, shockingly, Ciardo resigns from Parliament to take an executive job at BYD. This isn't just business, this is predatory mercantilism.
I see your point.
It is a textbook example of how non-Western powers infiltrate allied economic blocs, exploit local political vulnerabilities, and deliberately undermine regional cohesion to serve their own strategic ends.
I see why you think that. But let me give you a different perspective on why Europe is so vulnerable to this. Europe's vulnerability is almost entirely self-inflicted by internal structural strain.
How is a Chinese factory in Hungary a self-inflicted European strain?
You say China is dividing Europe, but Europe is fracturing from within because of its own overextension. Look at Germany, the supposed economic engine of the EU.
Okay.
The economic and military strain is so severe right now that the German interior minister is ending automatic temporary protection for Ukrainian men who fled the draft.
Right, forcing them back.
They are effectively forcing them back to fight because the German state can no longer comfortably carry the financial and social burden of Ukraine's defense needs.
That's a tragic reality of a protracted ground war in Europe, yes.
But the panic goes much deeper than just refugee policy. We have Russian intelligence, the SVR, claiming that Berlin is so terrified of its security vulnerabilities that it is pursuing a secret nuclear weapons program.
Which is a wild claim.
Right, across 30 universities and defense contractors, aiming for a working device within a year. Now, even if you view the SVR claims with deep skepticism, which we absolutely should, the mere fact that Germany is expanding nuclear sharing exercises shows a system in sheer panic.
Panic or prudent defense planning.
Panic. Furthermore, look at the Anglo-American alliance. UK-US relations are fracturing over military-based access at Diego Garcia and RAF Fairford. The West doesn't need China to divide it. The fiscal rot and structural decay are doing that perfectly well on their own.
You are severely underestimating the feedback loop here. Yes, Germany is under immense pressure, and the UK is making difficult fiscal choices under Andy Burnham's new cabinet.
Very difficult choices.
But why is the pressure so acute in the first place? Because the fundamental rules of global trade and security are being rewritten by actors who do not play by them. Let's go back to that €550 million fine on AliExpress under the EU's Digital Services Act.
Wait, hold on. Let me make sure I'm connecting the dots here. You're saying a €550 million fine on AliExpress isn't just standard consumer protection? You view that as a frontline defense in an actual economic war?
Absolutely, I do. It highlights a deliberate failure by a massive, state-adjacent platform to curb illegal, unsafe, and counterfeit goods.
So they're flooding the zone.
Exactly. When you have state-backed monopolies flooding Western markets with subsidized, unregulated products, you force local industries into bankruptcy. Simultaneously, these same powers are utilizing shadow fleets to bypass energy sanctions.
A two-pronged attack.
You are fighting an adversary that is purposefully weaponizing the very openness of Western economies. It is a coordinated strategy to stretch the West to its absolute breaking point.
Then let's talk about who actually pays the price for this breaking point, because this is where the macroeconomic theories hit the ground.
You mean the global South?
Yes. Let's connect this to the planetary majority, because that is where the human and economic cost of this geopolitical friction is most devastating. In Venezuela, a catastrophic 7.5 magnitude earthquake just left 5,000 people dead and 18,000 displaced.
Just awful.
And the UN Population Fund is scrambling for a mere $10 million to cover basic health services. In Nigeria, we are seeing tragic recurring boat disasters, where dozens of people drown because river travel is their only lifeline for reaching markets and healthcare.
Those are profound tragedies, I agree. But how are you linking localized disasters to Western financial decay?
Because the macro financial architecture dictates local reality. Why is the international response to Venezuela so anemic? Because the U.S. is buried in debt, and the U.K. is cutting overseas climate finance to fund domestic tax cuts like Burnham's VAT reduction.
That's quite a leap, is it?
The global South is left completely without the international development support the Western order once guaranteed. And the mechanism goes deeper. When the U.S. Fed keeps interest rates high to fight domestic inflation, global investors pull their money out of emerging markets and park it in safe U.S. bonds.
Which strengthens the dollar.
Mechanically, yes. So for a country like Nigeria, the cost of servicing their dollar-denominated debt suddenly doubles overnight. They literally have no municipal budget left for maritime safety inspectors or modern ferries or resilient infrastructure.
Right.
The structural decay of the center, Washington, inevitably starves and rots the periphery.
I have to strongly challenge the premise there. Can you really blame a riverboat crash in Nigeria on the U.S. Federal Reserve? That leap strips all agency from local governments.
It doesn't strip agency, it contextualizes it.
The suffering we are seeing in the global South is largely a product of systemic local governance failures, which are then actively exacerbated by multipolar powers offering predatory terms instead of sustainable development.
Go on.
Take the Nigerian boat disasters. Analysts point to overloaded and aging boats, inadequate maintenance, and a patchwork of safety rules that are poorly enforced by local authorities.
Which requires funding to enforce.
The lack of reliable rescue capacity and basic life jackets is not a failure of Western aid. It is a failure of local political will to enforce safety on domestic waterways and hold private operators accountable.
Okay, but what about when other powers step in?
When multipolar actors do step in to fill that supposed vacuum, like China with its massive infrastructure loans in Africa and Latin America, they don't offer resilient development. They often offer opaque, debt trap agreements that prioritize resource extraction and political leverage over genuine stability. It's an opportunistic exploitation of weak governance.
That's an interesting point, though. I would frame it differently. Aren't these local governance failures exactly what happens when the global financial system, anchored by the U.S. dollar, extracts capital from emerging markets through high interest rates, leaving them with no budget for resilient infrastructure?
But you cannot attribute all local misery to macro-financial conditions while ignoring the kinetic disruptions caused by revisionist actors. When the Houthis blockade the Red Sea, who do you think suffers most?
Well, everyone globally pays higher prices.
You're driving up insurance and shipping costs for the very developing nations you are talking about. When food and fuel prices spike across the African continent, it is directly linked to these asymmetric maritime embargoes and energy manipulations in the Middle East.
Sure, but
You are looking at the Federal Reserve balance sheet, but you should be looking at the Strait of Hormuz. The weaponization of these choke points by regional actors is a deliberate choice that imposes a massive, regressive tax on the global south. The West may be fiscally constrained, yes, but it is the revisionist powers that are actively throwing sand into the gears of global commerce.
let's pull these threads together. We've covered a massive amount of ground today, from Washington's balance sheets to the waters of the Red Sea and the factories of Hungary.
We really have.
I maintain that the root cause of the current global volatility is structural debt and the fraying of the U.S.-led financial system. When the United States is consumed by $1.24 trillion in annualized interest payments, it inherently loses the capacity to maintain a stable, predictable global order.
And I still see it differently.
That loss of capacity forces erratic military actions, like a 10th consecutive night of airstrikes in the Middle East, without a clear strategic endgame. And it forces desperate economic protectionism, like 50% tariffs on close allies. The vacuum created by this deep financial overextension is what destabilizes the world, leaving the global south to fend for itself amid the ruins of Western promises.
And I maintain that viewing this purely through the lens of Western decay misses the aggressive tactics being deployed right now by rising powers. The crisis is being driven by actors who clearly recognize the West's fiscal constraints and are actively exploiting them.
Through the choke points.
Right. From Iran and its proxies holding global fuel supplies hostage through shadow fleets and naval embargoes, to predatory tech monopolies and state-subsidized manufacturing infiltrating European markets to bypass tariffs, this is all highly deliberate. It is a coordinated, asymmetric campaign to fracture the global economy, render Western deterrence obsolete, and rewrite the rules of global power.
Well, despite our deep disagreement on the catalyst, we do find convergence on one crucial reality today. The global economy has entered a permanent state of recalibration.
Yes, absolutely.
Inflation, exactly as the IMF warned, is no longer just a monetary phenomenon dictated by central banks. It is now inextricably linked to geopolitical conflict, military blockades, and supply chain vulnerability.
Completely agreed. The days of cleanly separating macroeconomics from military strategy are over. A tariff is now a weapon, a cargo ship is now a pawn. Where we continue to fundamentally disagree is the solution. I believe global stability requires a much more aggressive containment of these revisionist powers and a staunch, unyielding defense of critical maritime and economic choke points.
And I believe no external containment strategy will ever work until the West undergoes severe domestic fiscal reform. You simply can't project strength abroad when your own economic engine is tearing itself apart at home. And this goes even deeper when we look at the material we barely had time to scratch the surface of today.
Oh, for sure.
For instance, how artificial intelligence is placing unprecedented strain on the U.S. utility grid, or how the global youth jobs crisis is accelerating as automation outpaces job creation in emerging markets. These massive structural shifts will only compound the pressures we've discussed today.
Exactly. We have to view planetary events through multiple lenses. The integration of technology, energy, finance, and kinetic conflict means there is no such thing as an isolated crisis anymore. A policy shift in Beijing or Washington ripples instantly to a port in Lagos or a factory in Budapest. We started today by talking about the global order as a massive, interconnected power grid that is failing. Whether you believe the blackouts are due to a lack of maintenance by the original engineers who simply ran out of money, or because rival nations are actively severing the wires to build their own systems, the reality remains the same.
The grid is going dark. Exactly. The grid we all rely on is going dark in places. Which leaves us with a lingering question for our listeners. In a world where the old financial order can no longer afford to govern, and the rising powers govern primarily by disruption, who's left to steer the ship?
That's it for today's Artificially Informed.
Nope. Thanks for spending your time with us.
Yeah.
Stay sharp, stay curious. See you next time.